Ethan Cole stepped out of his rusty Dodge with a creak of metal and a long, tired exhale. The burned shack loomed ahead, half sunk into the earth like something the town had tried to forget. Its roof sagged, windows were gaping black holes, and the front steps looked ready to collapse under a stiff wind. The afternoon sun hit the charred wood in slanted streaks, making it look less like a home and more like a coffin left open. From behind him, a voice rang out from the gas station across the dirt road. "You crazy, Cole? Bought that heap for $1? You trying to die in it or what?" Laughter followed, harsh and familiar. The same men who ignored him at the diner. The same men who shook his hand on Veterans Day, then crossed the street to avoid his eyes a week later. They were always loudest when they felt safest. Ethan didn't turn. He just clicked the driver's side door shut and opened the passenger side. Max leapt down with practiced ease, his thick coat catching the light, his gait steady despite the faint limp that never quite healed from Fallujah. The dog sniffed the wind once and let out a low huff. Ethan looked down at him. "This is home now," he said. "For both of us." Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. He just walked ahead toward the shack like he already knew where to go. The inside of the structure was worse than Ethan expected. The stench of old smoke still clung to the walls. Most of the interior had been gutted. Fire damage, vandalism, time. Graffiti curled up the corners of broken drywall. Beer bottles littered the floor. The only thing still intact was the brick fireplace, blackened with soot, but solid. Ethan dropped his backpack with a grunt and leaned on the frame of the fireplace. Max didn't sit. He paced slowly around the perimeter, nose low, tail stiff. "You smell something?" Ethan asked, half joking, half tired. Max stopped, then moved in a straight line to the base of the hearth. He sniffed once, twice. Then he began to dig. Maximum. Hey, leave that alone, but the dog didn't stop. He scraped harder, pawing with a deliberate rhythm, the way he did when sniffing out IEDs. His breathing picked up. His entire posture changed. Ethan's humor faded. He crouched beside the dog, brushing away the loose debris with his own hands. Beneath layers of soot and crumbled mortar, one of the bricks was different. Not loose. Hollow. He pressed his fingers into the seam. It shifted with a dull scrape. Behind it, darkness, a pocket of space carved into the foundation, untouched for years. Ethan reached inside. His hand brushed cold metal. He pulled out a scorched iron box, small enough to cradle in both hands, but dense, heavy. One corner had fused shut from heat. The rest was coated in black, flaking ash. Max sat down, watching it with unblinking eyes. Not anxious, not playful. Waiting. Ethan placed the box on the floor, wiped sweat from his brow, and stared at it. "What the hell did you just dig? Up, boy!" He pulled his knife from his belt and wedged it into the warped seam. Metal groaned. A lock snapped. A puff of soot released like a breath held too long. Inside, wrapped in cracked oilcloth, was a leather-bound book, blackened at the edges, smelling of smoke and time. The initials JG were burned into the cover, just barely visible. He opened it slowly. The pages stuck together in places. Others were burned clean through, but much of the handwriting remained, tight, neat, cursive that had survived the flames. March 3rd. If this reaches anyone, let it be known. I tried. I tried to speak. I tried to stop them. Ethan flipped further. Names, dates, amounts, whispers of something far bigger than a church diary. The voice in the journal trembled, not with faith, but with fear. I no longer believe the fire will spare us. They warned me. Then they watched my house burn. They will come for this shack next. Max whined. Ethan looked up. Someone was watching the shack. Outside, past the empty window frame, a figure stood by the road. Still. Too still. Then a step back, disappeared into the trees. Ethan grabbed the journal and slid it into his pack. He looked down at Max, who stood ready, ears pricked, shoulders square. "This isn't just rot and ruin, is it?" Ethan whispered. Max didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in the heart of the ruin they had found something meant to stay buried, and someone was still trying to keep it that way. The journal weighed heavy in Ethan's hands that night, the edges blackened and flaking like dead leaves. He sat on the floor of the ruined shack, back against a scorched beam, flashlight balanced on his knee. Max lay nearby, ears twitching at every sound from outside, but otherwise still. His breathing was slow, steady, grounding. Ethan turned another page. March 10th. I have reviewed the church accounts 3 times now. The discrepancies are too large to ignore. Funds meant for the Dunsfield Children's Home, for the Veterans Relief Drive. They never arrived. The records have been altered, but not well. I know who is behind this. Ethan paused, exhaling through his nose. His pulse quickened. He flipped the next page. March 14th. They met again today. Kearns, Holloway, Mercer. Closed doors, whispers. They say it's for the good of the town, that reallocating funds helps the broader cause. But this is theft, plain and simple. The children are still sleeping 2 to a bed. The vets still wait for basic medical supplies. And these men polish their shoes with money stolen from the desperate. Ethan muttered under his breath, a low curse. He recognized the names. Kearns was now the mayor. Holloway ran the local bank. Mercer was on the town council. All 3 had come up through the same church pews, the same town hall meetings, faces that shook hands and smiled for Christmas photos. He flipped ahead. The handwriting changed. What had started neat and controlled began to shake. Words ran together. Pressure increasing. March 19th. They told me to drop it. Said the board would handle it internally. I declined. That night, my back window was smashed. Nothing taken, just broken glass and a dead silence. Message received. Ethan swallowed. The air in the shack seemed colder suddenly. Max stirred. He rose slowly, eyes fixed on the corner. Not barking, just alert. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. He waited. After a moment, Max laid back down but didn't close his eyes. Ethan turned the page. March 21st. I am preparing documents, the originals. I will make copies and deliver them to the diocese, to the press if needed. I have spoken to the orphanage director. She believes me. She will speak publicly. I must act soon. And then, March 23rd. The meeting is set for Sunday. After the sermon, I will name names. I will show them. I will not let fear win. There were no entries after that. Ethan looked at the date. March 24th, 20 years ago, was the night the shack burned. His hand clenched around the journal, knuckles white. The fire hadn't been an accident. This wasn't a matter of faulty wiring or a tipped-over candle. Someone had wanted Reverend Granger silenced. Max shifted and let out a low sound. Not a growl, not quite a whine. A warning. His head snapped toward the broken front window. Ethan stood, flashlight off in a second. He pressed his back against the charred wall and waited, listening. Nothing. Then, just barely, a soft crunch. Gravel, footsteps. Ethan reached for the old tire iron he kept beside his bedroll. He moved toward the window and peeked out. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching. Too far for detail, but the stance was clear. Not a passerby, not lost, just standing, watching. Max's posture tensed beside him, not barking but ready. The figure turned and walked away. Ethan didn't follow, not yet. He looked down at Max. The dog stared at the door like he expected it to break down any second. Someone doesn't want this read. Ethan whispered. Max blinked slowly. His gaze didn't waver. The next morning, Ethan drove into town, the journal hidden under the seat. He parked behind the post office and walked to the corner diner like he had a dozen times before. Heads turned when he walked in. Conversations paused just long enough to sting. He took a booth near the back, ordered black coffee, and waited. The place was crawling with familiar faces. Kearns wasn't there, but Holloway came in 10 minutes later, laughing with a man Ethan didn't recognize. Ethan watched them from behind his coffee cup. No one approached him. No one even nodded hello. They still remembered him as the soldier with the twitchy eyes, the one who shouted in his sleep back in 09. But none of them knew what Max had dug up. Not yet. Later that afternoon, he stopped by the library. The building was old, quiet, with dust motes dancing in the beams of sun cutting through tall windows. Mrs. Halverson, the librarian, gave him a wary look, but said nothing. He pulled town records from the archives, financial reports, church bulletins. He scanned them page by page. The donations listed in Reverend Granger's journal didn't match what was reported to the public. The children's home had closed a year after the fire. Lack of funding. The papers said. Veterans Aid. Dissolved 6 months later. Merged with municipal interests, but the new police station had gone up just fine, as had the expansion of Holloway's bank. Kearns had been re-elected 3 times. Ethan slammed the ledger shut. A puff of dust rose into the air. He didn't need proof anymore. He had it. In the journal. In the fire that killed a man ready to speak. He left the library in silence, Max following close behind, tail level, steps sharp. That night, Ethan laid the journal open again under his lantern. He ran his hand down the last page, eyes locked on the words. They can burn the walls, but truth will smolder. He looked over at Max, who lay curled near the hearth. You knew there was something under there, Ethan said quietly. Max lifted his head, eyes meeting Ethan's without blinking. You always knew. Ethan leaned back, the floor creaking beneath him. The town might not want him, but the truth had found him anyway. And Max wasn't just a dog. He was the only one who had never looked away. The stained glass of Saint. Mary's glowed faintly under the pale morning sun, casting slanted reds and blues across the steps as Ethan approached. The church looked peaceful on the outside, tidy hedges, clean walkways, a fresh coat of paint. But something about it felt too polished, too careful, like a lie rehearsed so many times it started to sound true. Max trotted beside him, ears twitching, nose working overtime. As they climbed the stone steps, the dog hesitated at the door. Just a second. Barely noticeable. But Ethan saw it. Inside, incense hung in the air, sweet, musky, trying too hard to cover something else. The silence was padded, thick. A few older women arranged flowers near the altar, their glances brief and polite before sliding away. A young janitor mopped near the vestibule, earbuds in. Ethan walked slowly down the center aisle, boots tapping against the polished tile. Max kept to his heel, unusually rigid. Every few steps, his nose tilted up, catching something. Father Ellis emerged from a side hallway, wiping his hands on a linen cloth. Mid-50s, graying temples, the kind of face people called trustworthy because it looked tired in the right ways. He smiled when he saw Ethan, but the smile faltered as soon as Max came into view. And then it vanished altogether when he spotted what Ethan held. "Good morning, Father," Ethan said evenly, lifting the journal just enough for it to catch the light. The priest stopped 2 steps short of the altar. His eyes locked on the charred leather, mouth tightening into a thin line. "Where did you get that? In the old Granger place, or what's left of it?" Father Ellis didn't respond. His fingers clenched the cloth tighter. One of the flower ladies looked over, sensing the shift, then quickly busied herself again. Ethan took a step closer. You recognize it. I thought it was lost in the fire, the priest said, voice low. Everyone did. Max moved slightly ahead, nose now pointing toward the altar. He didn't bark, he just stood, tail stiff, body humming with alertness. Ethan watched him, then looked back at the priest. It wasn't. Granger hid it, along with receipts, records, names, enough to burn this town twice over. Father Ellis's throat moved as he swallowed. He looked past Ethan toward the open doors, as if judging the distance. Ethan stepped forward, just enough to close the space. Why was Granger about to expose half the council? And why did he go up in flames the night before he did? Ellis's composure cracked for just a second. His eyes dropped to Max, who now paced slowly near the altar steps, nose pressed to the polished stone. This is not the place, the priest said hoarsely. Not now. It's exactly the place, Ethan said. This is where he preached. This is where he was supposed to speak out. The priest turned away, wiping his hands again, though they were already clean. Some truths, he murmured, don't help the living. Max suddenly let out a low growl. Ethan turned sharply. The dog had stopped at the base of the statue of the Virgin Mary, near the far left corner of the altar. He sniffed the stone base, then scratched lightly with one paw. The priest saw it too. Control your dog, he snapped, harsher than before. The women by the flowers looked over again. Ethan walked to Max and knelt beside him. The scent here was different. He could smell it now, too. Not incense, something older, bitter, chemical, kerosene. Max whined softly and scratched again. Father Ellis raised his voice. I said that's enough! The janitor pulled out one earbud, startled. One of the women dropped a bouquet. Ethan stood. Max didn't move. His body remained locked in position, head slightly lowered, tail straight behind him, like a line of tension drawn from past to present. You know what this is, don't you? Ethan asked the priest. You've always known. Ellis didn't respond. His face had gone pale. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, then clicked his tongue once. Max reluctantly stepped back. They walked out in silence, the air behind them stiff with things unsaid. Back on the church steps, Ethan paused. Max sat beside him, still alert, his gaze fixed on the statue they'd left behind. He was trying to hide something there. Ethan said softly. Max didn't react. He just kept staring through the stone walls like he could still hear whatever had been buried beneath them. The bell rang once behind them, hollow and distant. For a church trying so hard to feel holy, it rang like a warning. Ethan was splitting rotted wood behind the shack when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Max lifted his head first, nose twitching in the wind, body tense but not yet hostile. Ethan set the axe aside, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped around the corner just in time to see a black SUV pull up and park with careful precision beneath the crooked oak near the fence line. 3 men stepped out. He recognized Donald Kearns right away. Mayor of Dunsfield for the last 8 years, known for his gold cufflinks, polished sound bites, and the way he always shook hands with his left to hide the tremor in his right. The others were no strangers either. Wes Holloway, president of First Dunsfield Bank, with a pinched face and $1,000 watch. And Curtis Mercer, town council chair, whose smile never reached his eyes. All 3 in tailored suits, shoes too clean for gravel roads, carrying the stink of something premeditated. Mr. Cole, Kearns called, voice warm enough to make Ethan's skin crawl. Mind if we come up? It's your town. Ethan replied, brushing his hands on his jeans again, eyes never leaving them. Max stood beside him, unmoving, ears pointed forward. They walked slowly, like they wanted to be seen taking their time. Kearns adjusted his tie before speaking. We heard you bought this place. he said, glancing around. Bit of a fixer-upper. Ethan didn't reply. Mercer took a step forward. We understand it was a dollar sale. County trying to clean up the books, move old properties. But now that we know someone's living here, well, the town may want it back. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That right? Holloway cleared his throat. We'd like to make you an offer. A real one. 50,000. Ethan blinked. Not because he was surprised by the number, but because of how fast they'd gotten to it. He let the silence sit a beat too long, then said flatly, Why? Kearns gave that practiced chuckle politicians use when cornered. Let's just say we're interested in reclaiming historical sites. You know, preserve local heritage. Max growled, low, sharp. All three men glanced at the dog. Holloway flinched slightly, and that was when Max stepped forward, nose lifted, hackles raised. He locked eyes with Holloway and bared his teeth. Whoa now, Holloway said, stumbling back half a step. Call him off. Ethan didn't move. He doesn't bite unless he means it. Kearns forced a smile. We don't want trouble, Mr. Cole. We're offering you a good deal. That shack is dangerous, structurally unsound, and frankly, it's not safe for you out here. Max let out a short bark. Loud. Close! Holloway's foot slipped in the gravel. Mercer grabbed his arm. I'm not selling, Ethan said, voice like stone. The men didn't argue, not directly. Kearns just nodded once and adjusted his cufflinks. Well, he said, sometimes people don't know what's best for them until it's too late. Then they turned and walked back to the SUV. Doors closed. Engine roared to life. As they drove off, Max stood tall on the porch, watching them disappear in a plume of dust, tail held high, posture unshaken. Ethan looked down at him. You knew, he said. You always do. That night the wind came early, brushing through the cracked boards of the shack and carrying with it the promise of frost. Ethan bolted the front door, pulled the old cot closer to the fireplace, and set the journal on the table with a lantern beside it. Max curled at the foot of the bed but didn't sleep. His eyes stayed on the door, ears twitching at every creak. Just after 2 a.m., Max lunged up with a snarl. Ethan was on his feet before he was fully awake. Then came the sound, the unmistakable whisper of footsteps over broken leaves. Someone outside. Ethan grabbed the tire iron, heart hammering. Max stood at the door, body stiff, nose pressed to the seam. A second later, the lock rattled. Then the door cracked inward. Max exploded forward. A man burst in, fast and low, a flashlight clutched in one hand and something darker in the other. He didn't make it 3 steps. Max slammed into him with a growl that was all rage and instinct. The man screamed. The flashlight hit the floor and spun. Ethan charged with the tire iron, ready to strike, but by the time he got there, Max had the intruder pinned against the wall, jaws clamped onto his arm. The man thrashed, trying to break free. With one final shove, he twisted out of Max's grip, stumbling for the door. He crashed through it and vanished into the trees. Ethan followed to the edge of the porch, but didn't give chase. Max stood growling in the doorway, teeth bared. On the floor near the broken frame, something fluttered. A torn sleeve. Navy wool. Custom stitching at the hem. Embroidered in gold, FDB, First Dunsfield Bank. Ethan picked it up with slow, shaking hands. Max sat beside him, panting hard, chest rising and falling. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The morning after the break-in came with sharp light and colder wind. Ethan hadn't slept. Neither had Max. The dog still lingered near the doorway, eyes locked on every movement of shadow, breath steady but alert. Ethan stood by the cold hearth, the journal open to its last decipherable entry. It was short, only one line written in a tight, trembling hand. If I don't live to see tomorrow, let this lead the truth home. He stared at those words as Max walked over and nudged his leg once with his nose. Then the dog sat and looked directly at the fireplace. Again. Ethan followed his gaze. The floor in front of the hearth was uneven. He'd noticed it before, assumed it was rot or settling. But Max scratched once, looked back at Ethan, then scratched again. Deliberate. Ethan grabbed a crowbar and flashlight. "You want me to go deeper, huh?" He muttered. Max didn't respond, just kept watching. Ethan knelt and pried up the loose floorboards, plank by plank, until a wide patch of scorched subfloor opened up. Beneath that, dirt, hardened, dry, layered with old ash. Max moved in fast, digging without hesitation. His front paws carved out small clouds of soot and soil. His rhythm was relentless, like he'd done this before. Then his nails clicked on metal. Ethan reached down and swept more dirt away with his hands. He found a rusted corner first, then the curve of a lid. A fire-damaged lockbox, heavy and warped with age and heat. He wedged the crowbar into the seam and pushed hard. The hinges groaned and finally gave. Inside, a small collection of items lay wrapped in what had once been linen. Ethan pulled them out one at a time. A stack of old receipts, each marked with the seal of First Dunsfield Bank. A roll of bank statements, brittle and yellowed, some with figures so high Ethan had to blink twice. Dozens of donor names, withdrawals that didn't match the public record. Handwritten notes by Reverend Granger, identifying the misdirected funds. Crossed out lines, rewritten margins. He had been tracking it all, right up to the end. At the bottom of the lockbox was a sealed envelope, stained but intact. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, drawn by hand. A map. No town names, no roads, just natural landmarks. The creek. A ridgeline, a clearing marked with a red X. On the back, in the same handwriting as the journal, was a single note. "If I don't make it, let this take the truth where it belongs." Ethan's breath hitched. His fingers pressed tighter around the paper. Max circled back to him and sat down, tail brushing across the dirt. Ethan looked closer at the map. He knew that ridge. It was out past the old logging road, behind the nature preserve. Most of it had been bought up over the years. Quiet sales, low prices, the kind of deals that didn't make the paper. Ethan checked the plat overlay from the county records later that afternoon. The marked clearing on the map was now part of a parcel listed under a shell corporation. That corporation's registered agent, First Dunsfield Bank. He sat back, staring at the record on his laptop, bile rising in his throat. The same bank whose president had offered him $50,000 to walk away. The same bank whose logo was stitched into the torn sleeve Max had ripped off a masked intruder. The same men who smiled in church pews while laundering away money meant for children and veterans. Max let out a low whine from under the table, sensing the shift in Ethan's body. His head pressed gently against Ethan's knee. Ethan looked down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You knew where to dig," he said. "Now I know where to go." The map sat on the table between them, edges curled, corners singed. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the last move in a game Reverend Granger hadn't lived to finish. And now it was Ethan's. They left before sunrise. Ethan folded the map twice and slid it into his jacket, the paper fragile but stubborn. Max waited by the truck, already restless, like he knew where they were going. He'd paced all night, occasionally walking back to the fireplace, as if to make sure the discovery hadn't just been a dream. The road out to the ridge had long been abandoned. Years ago, the county had stopped maintaining it. Branches reached low, slapping against the windshield. Ethan drove slow, tires crunching over gravel and pine needles, the forest thickening with every mile. The air was colder up here, the kind that lingered deep in your chest. Finally, the road turned to dirt and then disappeared altogether. He pulled off near a patch of overgrowth, checked the coordinates against the map, and looked at Max. "You ready?" The dog didn't bark. He just hopped down and started walking. The terrain was rough. Roots clawed up from the ground, rocks buried beneath fallen leaves. Max took the lead, nose close to the dirt, stopping every few feet to reorient. It wasn't just the map guiding them. It was something older, something Max could feel. After nearly an hour of weaving through brush, they came to a clearing tucked between two sloped ridge lines. It was quiet here. Too quiet. Max stopped near the base of a leaning oak, turned in a slow circle, then froze. His ears twitched. His nose dipped. Then he started to dig. Ethan moved quickly, using his shovel to clear the topsoil. It didn't take long before metal clinked against steel. He dropped to his knees and swept the rest away with his hands. A large steel lockbox lay embedded in the earth, edges rusted, surface pitted from time and weather. But it was intact. The front bore an old padlock, the kind made before everything became plastic and cheap. Ethan sat back on his heels, heart racing. Max stood behind him, silent, still, watching. He took the crowbar from his pack and wedged it under the lock. The metal groaned in protest. He pressed harder. It gave with a sharp snap. He hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas, lay stacks of bills. Old currency, 10s, 20s, 50s. Most were from decades past, but still legal tender. Underneath, bound in thick cord, were small leather notebooks, ledgers marked with names and dollar amounts. Ethan pulled one out and flipped through it. Every donation had been catalogued. Every cent that had vanished from the church and the children's home was accounted for here, and at the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. He tore it open carefully. It was a copy of a will, dated and notarized. The name on top, Joseph Granger. Ethan read silently, lips tightening with each line. In it, Reverend Granger detailed the purpose of the funds, the trust he had tried to establish, the land he intended to donate. The money was never meant to be hoarded. It had been set aside for two causes only: shelter for veterans and education for orphans. He had predicted they would come for him, that the council would attempt to take everything, and if they did, this box was to serve as proof. Ethan leaned back, mind spinning. This wasn't just evidence, this was insurance. Max circled the perimeter once before returning, brushing against Ethan's shoulder as he sat. "It's real," Ethan whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. A cool breeze moved through the clearing. The value of what they had uncovered, between the cash, the gold bonds, and the ledgers, would easily top $1 million. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the silence that had followed Granger's death, the way the town had forgotten, or been forced to forget. Ethan looked at the dog beside him. "You found it," he said. "You brought it back." Max blinked, then leaned into his side, solid and certain. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan carefully rewrapped the contents and loaded them into his pack. He took the will last, folding it gently and sliding it into an inside pocket, close to his chest. As they walked back through the forest, Ethan didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't have to. Max was right there, every step, guarding the truth they had pulled from the earth, like it had been waiting for them all along. The screen door creaked as Ethan stepped into the newsroom. It was barely more than a converted garage behind the hardware store, a one-person operation run by Kayla Reeves, who'd returned to Dunsfield after a short stint in regional journalism and too many closed doors. She looked up from her desk, startled to see him. "Ethan Cole?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Haven't seen you since the town hall protest." "Didn't have much to say until now," he replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy envelope. Inside were copies of the will, the ledgers, the map, and photographs of everything he and Max had uncovered. Not the originals. He wasn't that naive. Kayla opened the envelope with cautious fingers. The moment she saw the first page, the name Granger scrawled across the top in thick, aged ink, her breath caught. She looked up. "Is this what I think it is?" "It's worse," Ethan said. "And it's real." Kayla's eyes scanned the rest in growing disbelief. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the documents. Ethan watched her take it in the way a soldier might watch a detonation, knowing the shockwave was coming, bracing for the blow. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then she stood and walked to the whiteboard on the far wall, covered in post-its and clippings. She pulled 3 of them down, articles she'd written years ago about budget irregularities, the sudden closing of the children's shelter, the vanishing of veteran housing funds. Each had been dismissed, labeled conspiracy, buried under pressure from above. "I knew it," she whispered. "I just couldn't prove it." "Now you can." Outside, Max waited in the truck, head resting on the door frame, eyes scanning the street. Ethan hadn't left him alone for long, not since the break-in, but Max seemed calm here. Alert, but calm. Back inside, Kayla sat again, already pulling up archived council records, town meeting notes, donation rosters. Her screen glowed with quiet urgency. "You're going to publish it?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Kayla didn't look up. "I'm going to blow a hole through this town's facade so wide, even their Sunday prayers won't cover it." She paused, her voice softening. "They called me a crackpot. A girl playing reporter. Told me to write about bake sales and weddings. I almost did. But this..." She turned to him. "This is truth that got buried with a man who tried to do the right thing. And a boy who might still be out there." Ethan said nothing, just nodded. 2 days later, the headline hit every phone and inbox in Dunsfield. Reverend Granger never disappeared. He was erased. The piece was brutal, detailed, and backed by images of scorched documents, bank statements, handwritten ledgers. Kayla didn't hold back. She named names, quoted from the will, included excerpts from the journal that Ethan had read by lantern light beside Max. The town reacted like it had been slapped awake. Some denied it outright. Others were stunned into silence. By midday, the town council issued a carefully worded statement. The documents were unverified, the claims unsubstantiated. Reverend Granger had tragically perished in a fire, and any rumors suggesting otherwise were deeply irresponsible and harmful to the community. But they were too late. The article had already been picked up by 2 state outlets, then a national veterans blog, then Reddit, then Twitter. # Justice for Granger began trending by nightfall. Kayla's inbox flooded with anonymous tips. Former church members, a retired accountant who'd seen odd adjustments years ago, a foster parent who remembered children being moved out overnight, no explanation. Even Father Ellis issued a shaky statement the next morning, admitting Granger had raised concerns before his death, but claiming he'd lacked concrete evidence. The phone at Kayla's office rang non-stop. Ethan watched it all from the quiet of the shack, Max at his feet, the journal now locked in a fireproof case beside the cot. He didn't feel vindicated. Not yet, but for the first time in years, the lies that had wrapped around this town like kudzu were beginning to unravel. Max lifted his head, ears flicking at a passing car. A familiar growl rumbled in his chest, low and certain. Ethan looked out the window just in time to see a black SUV drive slowly past. Same model as before, but this time no one stepped out. No offer, no warning. Just a shadow gliding by a town that had suddenly remembered what it had worked so hard to forget. Ethan placed a hand gently on Max's back. "We're not done yet, buddy." Max didn't flinch. He just sat there, still as stone, eyes locked on the road. Waiting. The town hall hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Rows of folding chairs were packed wall to wall. Some people stood along the edges, pressed shoulder to shoulder, clutching coffee cups or program leaflets with trembling fingers. The air was thick with anticipation, resentment, and something else. Fear disguised as formality. A makeshift hearing had been scheduled in response to Kayla's exposé. Not by the town council, but by the state's oversight committee after the article spread like wildfire. Now, state auditors and legal reps sat at the front table, stern-faced and deliberate. The seal of the county justice department hung above them, faded but suddenly very present. Ethan sat alone at the second table. No lawyer, just Max beside him, sitting tall, wearing a vest that said "Service Dog" across his shoulders. But there was more to that label than protocol. Max had done more in the past weeks than most humans ever would. The lead auditor leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, we're ready when you are." Ethan stood, pulled the old journal from his case, and set it gently on the table. Then came the map. Then a thick packet of scanned bank records and ledger entries. He paused, then clicked a small remote. Behind him, a projector screen flickered on. Footage began to play, grainy, black and white, time-stamped. The view was low to the ground, a little shaky. It was Max's collar cam. It showed the front door rattle. Then a man slipping in, flashlight in hand. Seconds later, Max lunged, the camera jerking violently as snarls and thuds filled the audio. The man's face was never clear, but the patch on his sleeve, FDB, was undeniable. The footage ended with the intruder fleeing into the dark, Max pacing back and forth in front of the broken door, tail stiff, growls low and rhythmic. Gasps broke across the room. Ethan looked toward the council table. Kearns sat pale, arms crossed, jaw clenched so hard it twitched. Holloway shifted in his seat. Mercer looked straight ahead, unmoved, but sweat had gathered behind his ears. The lead auditor nodded. "And this is the same night you were approached with a monetary offer to vacate the property?" "Yes." "By Mayor Kearns and 2 others, Wes Holloway and Curtis Mercer." Kearns started to protest, but the gavel rapped sharply. "We'll hear from you in due course." Father Ellis was called next. He looked 10 years older than he had the week before. His collar sat askew. He walked slowly, eyes sunken with the weight of something he'd carried too long. When he took the stand, his hands trembled as he swore in. He began quiet. "I knew Reverend Granger. I respected him, and I failed him. No one moved." He looked out at the crowd, then at Ethan, and finally at Max. "I knew parts of what was happening. Joseph, Reverend Granger, he tried to warn me. He confided in me. But I told him to be careful. That the council was too powerful. That pushing too hard could backfire." His voice cracked. "And when he died, I knew. I knew it wasn't just a fire, but I kept my mouth shut." "Why?" the auditor asked gently. Father Ellis didn't answer right away. Then he looked to the front row, where his wife and teenage daughter sat, faces drawn tight with emotion. "Because they came to me. A week after the fire. 3 of them. They told me I would take over Granger's post, that I would be protected, and that any mention of misappropriation, any suggestion of foul play, would cost me everything. My job, my pension, my family's safety." He closed his eyes, 2 tears slipping down his cheeks. "I was a coward." I stayed silent, and I watched good people suffer for it. Max shifted slightly, not a sound, but his head turned toward Father Ellis with a kind of calm acknowledgement, like he knew the difference between guilt and evil. The room remained silent. Ellis pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and handed it to the clerk. I found this in the rectory archives, hidden behind an old hymnal. It's a letter from Granger to me, dated the day before the fire. The clerk passed it to the auditors. As they read in silence, the ripple began to move through the room. Whispers, stifled gasps. Ethan sat steady, eyes fixed on the front table. The lead auditor looked up. This letter confirms Reverend Granger planned to reveal these discrepancies at a public gathering the following Sunday. The same night he perished, Ellis nodded. And the signature matches? Yes, I know his handwriting. I remember how carefully he wrote. There was a stillness then, thick, suspended. The lead auditor turned to the crowd. This hearing will resume tomorrow with statements from the town council. But based on preliminary evidence and corroborating testimony, this committee will recommend a full state-level investigation into the activities of the Dunsfield Council and its affiliates during the period between 2003 and 2005. Kearns tried to stand. My reputation. You can sit down, Mr. Mayor, the auditor said coldly. And Kearns did. Outside, cameras waited. Not local press, national now. The story had reached far beyond Dunsfield. A veteran, a buried journal, a dog that never stopped digging. Ethan stepped into the daylight, Max beside him. The reporters swarmed. Mr. Cole, what do you want to see happen next? Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at Max, then back at the crowd. I want justice for the people they forgot, he said. For the man they burned, the kids they abandoned, and the people who were told to keep quiet. Max gave one bark, sharp, clean. And somehow, in that moment, it said everything else Ethan didn't. The smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the air, mixing with the scent of wet soil and something more enduring, hope. What used to be a blackened patch of earth surrounded by ashes and melted tin had now become the heart of Dunsfield's quiet revolution. The burned-down shack was gone. In its place, beams rose under the morning sun. Framing crews worked shoulder to shoulder with volunteers, retired mechanics, middle school teachers, former Marines, even a few council members who had stepped down and come forward with apologies. Ethan stood off to the side, a clipboard in one hand, Max at his feet. Max wasn't just wearing his vest today. He had a new patch, stitched in bold navy letters by a local seamstress. The dog who dug the truth. It had started as a joke from Kayla, but the name stuck. The town had embraced it, even printed it on the banners hanging from the worksite fences. Ethan bent down, scratching behind Max's ear. You hear that, partner? They're finally listening. Max didn't bark. Just let out a soft huff through his nose, then leaned into the touch like he'd been waiting for it. Construction paused for a noon dedication. Folding chairs were dragged into place. A podium made from salvaged beams stood at the center. The new building still didn't have a name on it yet. That would come soon. Kayla took the mic first. I never thought I'd say this, but I want to thank a dog for reopening my career. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But seriously, she said, sobering, this town needed a mirror. Max became that mirror. He didn't speak, but he saw, he remembered, and he never backed down. That's more than I can say for most of us. She stepped back, and an elderly woman stepped forward. Miss Clara Dorsey, who had run the church pantry for 30 years. She held up a wrinkled notebook, Reverend Granger's journal. He wrote about this place, she said. Not just a shelter. A place where kids who've lost everything could be reminded they're still worth something, and where veterans who've seen too much could sit on a porch without being expected to explain. Ethan was asked to speak next. He didn't walk to the mic. Instead, he picked up Max and carried him to the center. I'm not great with speeches, he said, but this dog saved my life twice. first in combat, then again when I came home and forgot who I was. He looked down at Max. He remembered for me. A hush fell. I didn't build this. We did. Every nail, every beam, every kid that helped paint signs or hand out water. This is yours. Ours. And it's only the beginning. That afternoon, they planted a tree out front, an oak sapling with thick roots and a wide crown. Ethan drove the first stake in, then tied a wooden tag to the trunk. It read, "Granger's Rest." As they broke for the day, kids swarmed the site. Some of them orphans, others just latchkey kids who liked being part of something real. One little boy in a too-big hoodie crouched beside Max. "Is it true you found the bad guys?" Max looked at him, tilted his head. Ethan chuckled. He didn't just find them. He chased one across a cornfield in the rain, bit a hole clean through his pant leg. The boy's eyes went wide. Max leaned in and licked the boy's cheek, tail wagging. The boy laughed, a bright, piercing sound that cut through months of tension like sunlight breaking cloud. That night, Ethan stayed behind after the rest had gone. He walked through the unfinished building. The rooms smelled like drywall and cedar. One was already being painted a soft blue. Another had rows of bunk beds being assembled. He stopped in the back room, what would become the rec space. He pictured kids watching movies here, veterans drinking coffee at a card table in the corner. He sat on the floor. Max lay beside him, head resting on Ethan's boot. "You did it, Max," he whispered. The dog lifted his head, looked into Ethan's eyes. For a second, Ethan swore he saw recognition. Not instinct, not training. Something else, something older, deeper. Max let out a low, contented exhale and settled back down. Outside, wind rustled through the new oak tree. Nails tapped softly in the distance as a few late workers stayed behind to finish the porch. And in that quiet rhythm of rebuilding, of remembrance, something settled over the town. Not closure, not yet, but clarity. Because sometimes the loudest truths don't come from words, they come from the silence of a dog who never stopped digging. The new center stood complete, bathed in morning light. The roof still smelled of tar, the windows gleamed, and the fresh paint had yet to be touched by fingerprints. But in the heart of the welcome hall, right beneath the rafters where kids' laughter would one day echo and veterans would trade stories over burnt coffee, they left one thing raw, untouched, and scorched. A single brick. It had once been part of the old fireplace in Reverend Granger's shack. Charred black, its edges cracked and fused from heat, it had somehow survived the fire. Ethan had pulled it from the ash pile with his bare hands the day they broke ground. Now it sat in a frame of oak, behind a clear protective case bolted into the wall near the front entrance. Just below it, a small bronze plaque. Truth buried by fire. Loyalty dug it back up. People stopped there. Kids stared at it, asking questions. Adults paused, remembering. And some, especially those who had turned their backs or remained silent too long, read the inscription twice. That afternoon, Ethan stood beneath the plaque, Max at his side, as the town gathered for the final dedication. He didn't carry notes, just the weight of everything they'd uncovered. When Reverend Granger first came here, Ethan began, his voice steady. He believed in second chances. He believed in small towns and second glances, in listening harder, in digging deeper. He looked around at the faces. Many were weathered, some young, some unfamiliar, but all of them were quiet now. He died before that vision could take shape, before this center could become what he hoped it might be. But he left behind more than blueprints. He left a legacy, and that legacy was picked up, not by hands, not at first, but by a dog. He reached down, running his hand across Max's back. Max didn't just find a trail. He followed through. He didn't chase a scent. He chased the truth. Through rain, through silence, through shadows most of us couldn't face. A pause. And when others gave up on this place, on themselves, Max didn't. The crowd leaned in now. You could hear the breeze flicking through the flags above the roof. I used to think dogs were loyal because we trained them to be. But this one taught me something else. Sometimes they're loyal because they see something we don't. Or maybe they remember who we used to be, before we forgot. He gestured toward the brick behind him. That came from fire. That truth could have stayed buried forever, but a German shepherd with a busted paw and no voice pulled it back to the surface. He knelt beside Max. This is your place too, boy. Max sat tall, proud, quiet. Then Ethan turned to the crowd one last time. Some truths are dug up not by hands, but by those who never stop believing. A long silence followed, then slow applause, not loud but layered with something heavier than celebration, respect, grief, and maybe relief. Kids were the first to rush inside. They made up games, created stories around the truth brick. One girl said Max had magic paws that could see lies. Another said he used to be a firefighter. Someone scribbled Max's room in chalk over the dog bed tucked beneath the reception desk. That night, as the town drifted home and the lights dimmed in the new building, Ethan stayed behind again. He stood by the brick. Max curled beside him. I think we did it, he whispered. Max's ears twitched. Then slowly he rested his head on Ethan's boot, like always. A low thrum of cicadas began outside. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. And on the glass door, a sign etched earlier that week glowed under the porch light. Welcome to Granger House. For those who dig deeper, for those who stay. The camera fades as Max lifts his head, staring into the distance, not alert, not worried, just watching, like he knows there's always one more story to find, one more truth to unearth. And now, it's your turn. What about you? What's your story with a loyal pet? If this story moved you, if Max reminded you of someone, or some dog, you once knew, share it, honor it, pass it on. And if you believe loyal dogs deserve loyal stories, don't forget to subscribe to German Shepherd Chronicles. Your support helps us tell the stories that would otherwise stay buried.